Rachel's hands trembled as she held her bouquet, the white roses shaking slightly against the silk of her dress. The music played softly, the guests stood and turned, and all eyes were on. It should have been the happiest day of her life. It should have been the moment she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. But as she walked slowly down the aisle, her smile quivered, because the one thing she prayed for, the one thing she hoped she could still believe in, was missing. Her family. There was no sign of her mother's proud face, no reassuring smile from her father, no teasing laughter from her sibling. The front row of seats, meant for them, stood completely empty. Not one of them came. Not even a message, not even a note. Just silence, as if she had never belonged to them in the first place. Rachel's chest tightened, and for a moment she almost stopped walking. She wanted to turn back, to run, to hide. But the music continued, and the guests whispered, their voices low but sharp enough to cut through her heart. "Where's her family?" one woman whispered. "Not even her parents?" another murmured. The words followed her like shadows. She tried to keep her head high, but she could feel the sting of tears already burning her eyes. Every step down that aisle felt heavier, as though she was dragging years of love, years of expectations, and years of rejection behind. Daniel stood waiting for her at the altar, his face full of love, his eyes soft and steady. He reached out his hand as she came closer, a silent promise that she was not alone. But even his warmth couldn't quiet the storm raging inside her. How could her own parents, the people who raised her, not come? How could her brothers and sisters, the ones she had grown up with, stay away on a day like this? Rachel's lips trembled as she whispered inside her heart, "Why would they abandon me like this?" The ceremony began, but she hardly heard the words. The pastor's voice blurred into the background as she stood there, fighting to steady her breathing. She could feel the stares, the judgment, the pity from those who filled the room. To them, it wasn't just a wedding. It was a scandal, a story they would carry back to their homes, shaking their heads in disbelief. Rachel's heart ached, but she forced a small smile, even as her hands grew cold. The question echoed inside her louder than the music, louder than the whispers, louder than the vows she was about to speak. Why? Why would a whole family turn their back on their daughter on the most important day of her life? She didn't know the full answer yet, but one thing was certain. This day, this silence, this betrayal, would change her life forever. Rachel was born into the Adeyemi family, a home where rules were strict, traditions were honored, and appearances meant everything. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi, carried themselves with dignity. In their community, they were known as people of respect, the kind of family others pointed to with admiration. They believed in hard work, in discipline, in following culture without question. But Rachel was different. Even as a child, she was the one who asked too many questions, the one who challenged rules when they didn't make sense to her. While her siblings obeyed without hesitation, Rachel's spirit was restless. She loved her family, but she couldn't silence the voice inside her that wanted more freedom, more honesty, more choice over her own life. To her parents, that independence was rebellion. To Rachel, it was survival. Growing up, she was reminded constantly of who she was supposed to be. A daughter who listened, a woman who followed the path laid out for her. Education was important, but obedience was greater. Respect for elders was sacred, and family honor was everything. Rachel tried for years to fit into the mold. She studied hard, helped at home, and played her part. Yet deep inside, she always felt she didn't quite belong. That feeling grew stronger when she met Daniel. Daniel was gentle, steady, and kind. He came from a middle-class American family who didn't have the same kind of wealth or standing the Adeyemis guarded so carefully, but they had warmth and acceptance. With Daniel, Rachel felt seen, understood in a way she never had before. He listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, and never tried to silence her voice. Where her parents saw stubbornness, Daniel saw strength. Where her family saw rebellion, Daniel saw courage. When Rachel first introduced him to her family, she hoped they would notice what she saw. Instead, their disapproval was immediate. Mr. Adeyemi's face grew cold the first time he shook Daniel's hand, as if the man standing before him wasn't worthy of his daughter. Mrs. Adeyemi said little, but her silence carried weight heavier than words. Her siblings whispered among themselves, some openly laughing at the idea that Rachel, of all people, would bring such a man home. Rachel, her father had told her one evening, his voice firm and final, a marriage is not just about love. It is about family, reputation, and standing. This man does not belong to our circle. He will bring shame to us. Rachel's heart sank. She tried to explain that Daniel was hardworking, that he loved her, that he made her happy. But to her parents, happiness was not enough. Respect and tradition came first. When Daniel proposed, Rachel said yes with joy, but the shadow of her family's disapproval fell over every moment of celebration. Instead of excitement, there were arguments. Instead of blessings, there were ultimatums. If you go forward with this marriage, her mother told her one night, eyes filled with disappointment, You will choose him over us." Rachel cried, torn between the people who raised her and the man who loved her. Her siblings added to the pressure, some accusing her of selfishness, others mocking her choice. They called Daniel ordinary, as if being ordinary was a crime. They reminded her of everything the family had done for her, every sacrifice, every opportunity, and asked how she could throw it all away for love. The engagement period became a battlefield. Every call from home ended in guilt. Every family gathering felt colder. Rachel felt like she was slowly being pushed out, as if she no longer fit the picture of the daughter they wanted her to. Yet deep down, she knew she couldn't abandon Daniel. He was her safe place, the one person who stood by her when everyone else turned against her. Still, the weight of her parents' disappointment crushed her spirit. She wanted their blessing, but each day made it clear she would never have it. And so the distance grew. Love pulled her one way, duty pulled her another. By the time the wedding drew near, Rachel knew she was making a choice that would break her family apart. What she didn't know was just how far they would go to make her pay for that choice. The decision came one evening when Rachel sat in the living room with her parents. The air was heavy, the silence sharp, and her hands trembled as she waited for them to speak. She had prayed for a change of heart, prayed they would finally see how much Daniel meant to her. But her father's eyes were cold, his voice steady with finality. "Rachel," Mr. Adeyemi said, "we cannot give our blessing. This marriage will not happen with our approval." Rachel's breath caught. She had expected resistance, but hearing the words spoken so plainly felt like a knife cutting through her chest. "Daddy, please," she whispered. "Daniel is a good man. He loves me. Isn't that what matters?" Her father's expression did not change. "Love is not enough. You are blind to the truth. This man does not share our values. He is not from our background, not from our circle. To tie our family name to him is to lower ourselves. We cannot allow it." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, but before she could answer, her mother spoke, her voice calm but heavy with judgment. "Rachel, you have always been stubborn, always choosing your own way. But this time, you are crossing a line you cannot return from. If you marry him, you are no longer our daughter." The words hit Rachel like thunder. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at her mother, the woman who had raised her, who had once sung her to sleep, who had wiped her tears as a child. And now that same woman was cutting her off with words sharper than any blade. "Mummy," Rachel's voice broke as the tears spilled down her cheeks. "How can you say that to me? How can you choose pride over me? Over your own daughter?" Her siblings, who had gathered quietly around the room, said nothing. Some looked away, others smirked as if her pain proved their point. The silence from them was worse than any insult. Rachel turned to her father again. "I cannot leave Daniel. He is kind. He respects me. He is everything I prayed for. Why can't you see that?" Her father shook his head slowly. "Because you are blinded by feelings. One day you will understand, but by then it will be too late. As of today, we wash our hands from this matter. Do what you want, but do not expect us to follow you into disgrace." Rachel broke down completely. Her hands covered her face as sobs racked her body. She felt the walls of her family closing in, suffocating her, crushing her with rejection. Her siblings stood by, offering no comfort, only coldness. Her mother's words echoed again and again in her head, "No longer our daughter." Daniel found her later that night, her face swollen with tears, her heart shattered. She leaned into him, trembling, whispering the pain she could barely carry. "They disown me, Daniel. My own parents. My own blood. They said if I marry you, I'm not their daughter anymore." Daniel held her close, his voice steady but his eyes heavy with sorrow. "Rachel, I can't take away their cruelty, but I can promise you this. You'll never be alone with me. I will stand by you no matter what. Even if the whole world turns its back, I won't." Rachel wept against his chest, torn between the love of the man she chose and the family she lost. She wanted both, but the choice had already been forced upon her. And though her heart was breaking, she knew she could not abandon the one person who had never abandoned her. So, with a broken spirit but a determined will, Rachel pushed forward with the wedding plan. She carried her pain in silence, hiding her tears when she could, forcing herself to keep moving even when it felt impossible. The words of her mother still echoed in her ears like a curse. "If you marry him, you are no longer our daughter." And yet, Rachel walked forward, knowing that the path she chose would change her life forever. The weeks leading up to the wedding were supposed to be filled with joy. Rachel had imagined shopping trips with her mother, laughter with her sisters as they helped her pick the dress, her father walking her down the aisle with pride. Instead, her phone remained silent. No calls, no messages, no offers to help. Her family acted as though she didn't exist. Every morning she woke with a heavy heart, hoping she might see a text from her mother saying, "Rachel, let's talk." But there was nothing. It was as if a door had slammed shut and she was left outside, alone in the cold. Her friends tried their best to fill the gap. They accompanied her to bridal fittings, cheered her on when her smile wavered, and reminded her that love should be celebrated, not hidden. But even in their kindness, Rachel felt the emptiness. A part of her longed for her family's presence in ways no friend could replace. At night, when she lay awake staring at the ceiling, doubt crept in. Had she made the wrong choice? Was she being selfish? She replayed her parents' words again and again: shame, disgrace, no longer our daughter. Tears often slipped silently down her cheeks as she whispered into the dark, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't deserve happiness if it means losing them. But then she remembered Daniel's eyes, the way he looked at her like she was his whole world. His love was real, steady, something her heart couldn't deny. He reminded her each day that she mattered, that her worth wasn't tied to her family's approval. Still, guilt tugged at her constantly, pulling her between love and blood. Outside, the community began to talk. Whispers spread quickly, carried by neighbors and family friends who loved gossip more than truth. Did you hear? Rachel is marrying against her parents' wishes. They say her family won't even attend. What a disgrace. She's bringing shame to the Adeyemi name. Rachel heard the whispers everywhere she went, at the grocery store, at church, even walking down the street. Smiles turned into stares, greetings turned into pity. People treated her as though she had committed some terrible sin. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders until she thought she would break. Daniel noticed the change in her. He would catch her staring off into the distance, her smile fading as though her thoughts were dragging her into darkness. He would gently take her hand and say, "Don't let them steal this moment from us. Our love is not their shame." Rachel wanted to believe him, but the pain of being cast out by her own blood gnawed at her. Amidst the chaos, Daniel's parents quietly stepped in. They weren't perfect, and at first they had their own reservations about Rachel, worried she might be too different, too distant from their ways. But when they saw the abandonment she suffered, their hearts softened. His mother began visiting more often, helping with small details, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, giving advice with a warm smile. His father offered practical support, lending money when bills piled high from vendors. Though cautious, they did not let her face the storm alone. Rachel was grateful, yet the kindness from Daniel's parents also stung. She couldn't help but think, why are they here for me, while my own family stays silent? The closer the wedding drew, the heavier her heart became. She tried to throw herself into the preparations, picking decorations, rehearsing vows, organizing seating charts. But even as she smiled for the camera at her bridal shower, her eyes betrayed the sorrow she carried. In the photos, her friends stood around her, laughing, while the space beside her where her mother should have been remained empty. One evening, Rachel sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by wedding invitations and checklists. She held her dress against her body in front of the mirror, trying to imagine herself walking down the aisle. Instead of excitement, a lump rose in her throat. She whispered to her reflection, "Am I making the biggest mistake of my life?" The silence that followed gave her no answer. Her friends came to visit, sensing her fading strength. "Rachel," her maid of honor said gently, "you've always been brave. Don't let guilt steal this moment from you. You're marrying a man who loves you. That should be enough." Rachel smiled weakly, but inside she was still bleeding. She wanted her family's love. She wanted their blessing. She wanted them to see Daniel through her eyes. But all she had was their silence, their rejection, and the community's whispers reminding her she had stepped outside the lines drawn for her. The night before the wedding, she sat with Daniel's mother in the quiet of the living room. The older woman placed a gentle hand on hers and said, "Rachel, family is not just blood. It's those who stand with you when life is hardest. Tomorrow, when you walk down that aisle, remember, you are not alone." Rachel nodded, holding back tears. She wanted to believe it, to let those words soothe the wound in her heart. Yet deep down, the ache of betrayal lingered. She felt isolated, as though she stood between two worlds, one that rejected her, and one that accepted her with caution. Still, beneath the sorrow, a spark of determination burned. She loved Daniel. She had chosen him. And no matter how broken she felt, she refused to let her family's silence steal her future. When the sun rose on the morning of her wedding, Rachel stood before the mirror once again. This time, she straightened her shoulders, wiped away her tears, and whispered to herself, "I will walk forward, with or without them." Her heart was heavy. The church was filled with flowers and soft music, yet Rachel felt the emptiness the moment she stepped inside. The front rows still sat bare, untouched, reserved for her family who had promised never to come. Her hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet, her eyes sweeping over the guests who whispered behind their smiles. She told herself she would not cry, not now. Today was about love, about Daniel, about moving forward. When she reached the altar, Daniel's steady eyes met her. He smiled, trying to lift her spirit, and for a moment, she felt her heart calm. The pastor began to speak, his voice echoing through the hall, words of faith and unity. Rachel tried to focus on them, but every empty seat before her reminded her of what she had lost. Finally, the moment of vows came. Daniel spoke first, his voice strong, filled with warmth. He promised to love her, to stand with her, to never let go no matter what storms came. Tears filled her eyes as she listened. His words wrapped around her like shelter in a storm. Then it was her turn. Rachel opened her mouth, her lips trembling as she began. "I, Rachel, take you, Daniel." But before she could continue, a sudden stir broke out behind her. Her maid of honor, best friend since childhood, was standing stiff, her face pale. She looked torn, as though holding in something too heavy. Rachel paused, her heart beating faster. "What is it?" she whispered softly, barely audible to those around. The maid of honor swallowed hard, then took a step closer. "Rachel, there's something you need to know. I can't let you stand here without the truth." The room shifted. Guests leaned in, curious, confused. Rachel's eyes widened, fear spreading across her face. "What truth?" she asked, her voice shaking. Her friend hesitated, but then the words spilled out. "It wasn't just your parents who turned against you. It was your sister. She's the one who told them things from your past. She made them believe you were unworthy, that marrying Daniel would disgrace the family. She twisted the truth, Rachel. She gave them the reason to cut you off." The world seemed to stop. Rachel's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Her knees weakened, and Daniel quickly reached out to steady her, but her eyes were locked on her maid of honor. "My sister?" she whispered, as though saying the word would make it less real. The friend nodded, tears in her own eyes. "I overheard it. She bragged about it, Rachel. She told your parents about the mistakes you made years ago, the times you struggled, the things you trusted only her to know. She said you were reckless, that you would ruin the family name if they let you marry. And they believed her." Gasps filled the church. People exchanged shocked glances, whispers running like fire through the crowd. Rachel's chest tightened until she could hardly breathe. She felt her world collapsing. It wasn't just her parents who had turned their backs. It was her own blood, her own sister, someone she had trusted with her deepest secret. Her body shook as hot tears streamed down her face. She pressed her hands to her chest, her voice breaking into sobs. "How could she do this to me? My own sister? My own family?" Daniel tried to calm her, pulling her close, but Rachel pushed back, her pain spilling out like a flood. "I thought it was only my parents. I thought maybe they didn't understand, maybe they were too proud. But my own sister? She poisoned them against me." Her voice cracked, echoing in the quiet hall. All of them chose to believe her. Her legs gave way and she sank to the floor, her gown pooling around her as sobs racked her body. The guests sat frozen, some pitying, others wide-eyed with gossip. The shame, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all came crashing down at once. Daniel knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly. His voice was soft, pleading. "Rachel, please don't let this break you. You still have me. You still have us." But Rachel could barely hear him through the storm in her head. Memories of her sister flashed through her mind, their childhood games, their whispered secrets, the nights they promised to always protect each other. To know that same sister had stabbed her in the back left her hollow. "I have no family," she whispered, broken. "No parents, no siblings. They all turned against me." Daniel lifted her chin gently, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You still have me. You are not alone, Rachel. You are not." But even his steady words couldn't erase the explosion of pain tearing her apart. She felt stripped, exposed in front of everyone. Betrayal cut deeper than any rejection she had ever known. And as she sat there in her wedding dress, tears staining her face, the truth settled heavy in her chest. Her family hadn't just abandoned her. They had destroyed her from within. The ceremony halted, the room filled with silence except for her cries. The wedding she dreamed of had turned into a battlefield of secrets and betrayal. And though Daniel's love held her, Rachel's heart shattered in a way that love alone could not heal. The ceremony never returned to what it was meant to be. The vows were cut short, and the guests left with whispers and pity in their eyes. Rachel spent most of that night locked away in her room, still in her wedding dress, her face buried in her hands. Daniel sat outside the door, waiting, giving her space but never leaving. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were red, her body weak from crying. Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms. "We can stop everything if you want. We don't have to go on like this," he whispered. But Rachel shook her head slowly. Her voice cracked, but there was strength underneath. "No. If I stop now, then they win. I will not let their betrayal define my life. I will not let my sister's lies steal my future. I still choose you, Daniel." The next day, she walked into the small office where the marriage papers waited. With Daniel's hand in hers, she signed them. No family stood beside her, no cheers filled the air, but her heart felt a flicker of freedom. She had made her choice, and though it cost her everything, she knew it was hers to make. Days later, Rachel called her sister. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled as she held the phone. "Meet me," she said simply. Her sister agreed, sounding almost amused. They met at a quiet cafe. Rachel arrived first, sitting at a corner table, her chest rising and falling with nerves. When her sister walked in, dressed elegantly, her face carried no guilt. She sat down across from Rachel, folding her arms with a smirk. "So," her sister said, "you finally realized you don't belong anymore?" Rachel's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you betray me like that? I trusted you with everything, and you used it against me. You turned my parents, my brothers, everyone against me." Her sister leaned back casually. "Because you've always thought you were different, always breaking the rules, always thinking love is more important than all. You embarrassed our family, Rachel. Someone had to put you in your place." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but this time she didn't break down. She leaned forward, her voice sharp, cutting through the air. "You didn't put me in my place. You showed me who you are. You showed me that blood isn't always family. You may have disowned me, but I refuse to disown myself." Her sister blinked, the smirk fading slightly as Rachel's voice grew stronger. "I am not ashamed of my choices. I am not ashamed of Daniel. I am not ashamed of the woman I've become. You can twist my past, you can poison our parents' hearts, but you will never destroy me. I am free now, and I will live without the weight of your judgment." Silence hung between them, heavy and sharp. Her sister's face hardened, but Rachel stood up, her hands no longer trembling. She had no need to hear more. She had said what she came to say. Walking out of that cafe, Rachel felt a strange peace. The pain was still there, but it no longer owned her. For the first time, she felt the chains of guilt and shame begin to fall away. That night, she returned home to Daniel. He welcomed her with open arms, no questions asked, only love in his eyes. She leaned against him and whispered, "They may have turned their backs on me, but I will not turn my back on myself." And in that moment, Rachel knew she was no longer. The reception hall glowed with soft lights, music floating gently in the air. Rachel stood outside the doors with Daniel's hand firmly in hers. For a moment she hesitated, her chest tightening at the thought of the empty chairs inside where her parents and siblings should have been. The ache was still there, sharp and raw. But then she looked at Daniel, saw the quiet strength in his eyes, and she took a deep breath. Together they stepped inside. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their faces filled with warmth. Rachel's heart swelled as she realized that even though her family had turned away, she wasn't truly alone. Friends who loved her, Daniel's family who had chosen to stand by her, all of them were here. Hand in hand, she walked across the room, her white dress sweeping the floor, her eyes shimmering with tears. She smiled through them, not with sadness this time, but with strength. The pain was still part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She had survived the silence, the betrayal, and the rejection, and she was still standing. As she and Daniel took their place at the center table, Rachel felt a quiet peace settle over her. She glanced around the room one last time, accepting what was gone and embracing what she still had. Her family had chosen to turn their backs, but love had chosen to remain by her side. Rachel lifted her glass, her voice soft but steady. Family isn't always who raises you. Sometimes, it's who stands by you when the world turns its back. And with that, she smiled, a woman no longer broken but free. Hey besties, thanks so much for watching till the end. Rachel's family abandoned her on her wedding day, but she found strength, love, and freedom by standing with Daniel. If you enjoyed this emotional story of betrayal and resilience, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and of course, subscribe for more great stories. See you in the next one. Bye!